It has been a long time since there's been this much action. One sad note in all this, of course, is the absence of one name. Our job is to choose whom we think can be the most effective. It's an interesting and exciting race, and all we have to do is vote. So let's do it, and let's make it a big one. We pray that is so. This is Bob Harrington.
Washington moves fast, policies shift overnight, and yet here in our corner of Vermont, the real impact often comes at the speed of town meetings and Main Street conversations. Politics aren't just about headlines and sound bites. It's about people, communities, and the choices that shape our lives. They say all politics is local, but in a nation this divided, what does that actually mean? We're not here for spin, we're here for clarity, for straight answers, for the kind of talk you'd expect over a cup of coffee at the local diner, not in the halls of Congress. This is Matt Harrington, and this is the Chamber Telecast. Welcome back to the Chamber Telecast, a civic conversation series brought to you by the Southwestern Vermont Chamber and Catamount Access Television. I'm Matt Harrington, I'm your host. As we look across the country, national debates and around immigration, regulation, and labor protections and economic recovery, they're all heating up again, it seems like, with potential ripple effects for every employer, every worker, and every community in Vermont. At the center of many of these challenges and opportunities is the work of our state departments, our state and local government. Few have been tested more in recent years than the Department of Labor. Today, we are honored to be joined by Vermont's outgoing Commissioner of Labor, Michael Harrington. Appointed in 2020 during one of the most turbulent moments in modern workforce history, Commissioner Harrington has led the department through the COVID-19 crisis, major unemployment insurance reform, and ongoing workforce recovery efforts. Under his leadership, the department has launched new apprenticeship programs, expanded employer services, and improved claims modernization, all while navigating shifting federal policy and public pressure. Full disclosure before we begin, Commissioner Harrington is also my brother. That said, I can assure you there are no softballs today, just thoughtful questions and respect owed to someone who's led this state through historic workforce disruption. Welcome, Commissioner Harrington. How are you today?
Hi, Matt. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. It's always good to spend some time with my brother.
Sure. Is it okay if I call you Michael?
Yeah, it's fine.
We can make that. So, with all those intros, and it is great to have you on here, and I appreciate that as my brother and also as a person that I just really respect and a colleague as we've worked together through the many years that I've been at the Chamber and you've been at the department. It's always been a great relationship. But let's start on a human note. We ask this of all our guests just to kind of let us understand a little bit who you are, break the ice a little bit. What did you have for breakfast today, if you had any breakfast today? And what do you think it says about you?
Well, I'm a creature of habit, in case you didn't know that, Matt. So usually I rotate back and forth between a smoothie and some granola cereal. However, I finished the box of granola cereal I had earlier this week, and I didn't get a chance to go to the store. So this morning I had a granola bar to change it up a little bit. What it says about me, maybe it means I can be flexible on occasion, but also, I don't know. I think you and I have had this conversation before that, like when there are so many decisions you have to make or changes that occur in your life professionally, right? You do a lot to make sure your personal life is as simple as possible, right? And you don't have to make as many big decisions at home. And so, I don't know, maybe subconsciously, it's just easier. It's one less thing I got to think about if I know what I'm having for breakfast each day, or I know what I'm having for lunch each day ahead of time.
Yeah. I was almost going to say maybe you're getting more crunchy, being in Vermont for so long, eating granola might just be a little bit crunchier than normal.
Maybe that too. Yeah. Which is good too.
Good. Well, look, we've got a lot to talk about, and you are leaving the department coming up soon. So we do want to get to some of that and hear from you from there. But we've got a lot going on with the national and federal administration. So let's talk about it. With Trump's administration tightening up that federal oversight and reducing workforce program funding, what risks do you see for Vermont's ability to deliver training, apprenticeships, job placement services. I mean, go on as the services of the Department of Labor are just numerous. Are you concerned about this? Where do you kind of where do you fall on this May Day?
So I think the hard part is there's ripple effects across all agencies and departments because of the decisions that are being made at the federal level. Maybe not all of them are terrible. Maybe it's more about how they're being rolled out. I don't know. I think here at the department, there are significant impacts that are happening with our federal counterparts at the U.S. Department of Labor, and they will have some significant impacts. I think the good part about Vermont, and I think what a lot of Vermonters value, whether you're a person or an employer, is how small we are. And so, while we get a lot of our funding from the federal government, some of our programs are also supported by state funds as well. And maybe a little bit of the bright side here is that at least our department and the functions we have are some pretty core functions that have not necessarily been highlighted by the federal government or the Trump administration. So I think we will see some pulling back of federal monies, but we're not seeing wholesale cancellations of the programs that come out of this department. That said, we have had some, and I think we're all aware of AmeriCorps and some of these other programs that have lost virtually all of their funding. And that has created a very tumultuous situation and a challenge for workforce programs. So, for the most part, a lot of our apprenticeship work is driven by state dollars. And also, at least from what we're reading, is that work-based learning opportunities, apprenticeship, on-the-job training, other work-based training programs are actually a priority of interest for the president. And so while we may see less base funding coming to us on an annual basis, it wouldn't surprise me if there was discretionary funding or special funding that was provided through grants to states for those types of activities. But overall, I mean, it's a cutting of federal funds, and we'll have to figure out how to manage that both at the department here, but across state government.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's almost week by week, right? And we've learned even it's by 24 news cycle, the next day it could be something different. I've often said the same thing. We're a little bit in the same, I would say, category of, when a Republican is in office, there tends to be a little bit more focus on economic development, jobs, business development. So even as a Chamber of Commerce, although we don't align with the U.S. Chamber all that often, are we going to have a lot of things cut? Perhaps not in comparison to childcare and immigration and all that stuff, which obviously impacts we're going to get to that, but it impacts the workforce, all in this kind of great ecosystem that we have here in Vermont. One of the things
I think you also bring up a good point, which is just, it's important in these cases, right? Like you've got a vision, you've got a goal, you've got a North Star, right? And you don't lose sight of that, and you don't chase the rabbit down the rabbit hole because it changes so often, right? And you can waste a lot of time and energy chasing the next shiny object or the next potential crisis, but isn't really a crisis yet, right? So a lot of, I think what Governor Scott has emphasized and what I've emphasized to our team here is, keep your eye on the ball, right? We're here to complete a mission, and that's our focus. And if and when the time comes that we need to take a stance on something, we can. But right now, let's not get caught just kind of, again, chasing the rabbit down the rabbit hole for whatever the next thing is. And let's be focused on the mission ahead.
Yeah, and you and I have talked offline about that, and I think that's good advice for all Vermonters and all people. And and we also know that there is this shock and awe to the administration, the national administration, to create the silver, the shiny, the thing you're going to go chase after while we do other things over here. So we heed that advice from both you and the governor and I think that's a classic Scottism of just being slow, steady, calm, mature, when it comes to government bureaucracy in its best form. But let's hop into, I think, one of the biggest concerns we continue to have here in the state of Vermont is national labor force participation. They remain, below pre-pandemic levels. We're one of the oldest states in the nation, so we recognize that pretty acutely as well. I remember putting a survey out recently to our members, and interestingly, workforce finally went to number 2, but it was only because tariffs went to number 1 and the cost of goods. So, I think it's still a major concern for many of our businesses. What levers does the Department of Labor realistically have to counteract this trend of, trying to get people more into the workforce, more participation, more qualified workforce as well?
I think we do our best work in helping those with barriers find employment. And again, a barrier could be a training or educational barrier, a transportation barrier, childcare barrier, whatever, right? But and then also helping employers find talent. Regardless, we still have a shortage of workers in Vermont, and unlike other states, we don't have a lot of people sitting on the sidelines, right? So when you look at our unemployment rate, we're a little over 9,000 people currently unemployed for the month of April, and again, they only stay on unemployment for a matter of weeks before they're able to find a job. And so what we do know is that while other states are focused on how to pull people off the sidelines and get them into jobs, we also know here in Vermont that we don't have enough people on the sidelines to fill the jobs we have. And so we're really looking at new ways and this is not this is probably something people have heard a lot about, but we're looking at ways to upskill, right? So folks that are coming through high school or some type of secondary education or post-secondary education have what they need in terms of skills to become gainfully employed. We're looking at recruiting professionals from outside the state. One of the questions you and I talked about earlier was, what does immigration do for Vermont's workforce as well? And I think that will have an impact on our workforce and our ability to meet the demands also. So again, some of it is, when I try to like paint a picture, right, of what our workforce is looking like. Imagine you've got a bucket you're trying to fill with water, and the spigot with the water coming out is the flow of new workers into your workforce, right? But your bucket has a bunch of holes in it. And so you can sit there all day long trying to put more workers into your workforce, but if you're losing them just as fast as you're gaining them, you're not actually gaining any ground. And those holes include everything from the fact that we're an older population, so more of our population is retiring, to the fact that we don't have enough housing. So we lose a lot of talent to the lack of housing, or the need for education reform, or whatever it is. And so we also have to be thinking, and I think this is where the governor has really hit the nail on the head, is that, what is the root cause we are really struggling with workforce? And it's things like affordability, it's things like available quality housing, it's things like quality education, right? Those are the things that prevent people from wanting to move here and stay here. It's why folks leave the workforce and move to other states and locations. So again, I think those are the ones where we have to be thinking about what is the root cause to our workforce challenge, and working on those issues as well.
Yeah, you mentioned immigration, so let's go there. And I guess my question for you, Mike, more is just, where are you at the table when these really, again, I'll use the word acute kind of immigration. We haven't seen the full tilt of what could be, yeah. But obviously we keep inching towards it every single day in the news. But we had at least one deportation that we know of in Vermont, and quite public. Where are you at with that? I mean, do you find that you're at some of those seats saying, not only is it a human rights thing, but it's a labor thing. Like, we have farms, we have healthcare, and we have hospitality and tourism, and these places rely so much on any type of immigration, right? The various levels of that. Where do you find that you fall in that, or are you at that table, and are you kind of making the plea on behalf of the business owners and the farmers and the CEOs that are needing these immigrants?
Uh, yes and no. And some of that is because at the local level, the state level, I think a lot of us share the same opinion about immigration and the fact that it is a key workforce tool for us. And so, unfortunately, that debate really has to happen at the federal level. And that seems to be the sticking point or the challenging point. We also play a role in our foreign labor and new American workers in protecting their rights and protecting safe workplaces and or providing safe workplaces or assisting them with their visas to a certain degree for work. And so again, from that perspective, we're at the table in working with employers, but from a policy perspective, we are not, and that is mainly because of the limited role we play at the federal policy level, right? But we do assist employers with identifying foreign labor. We do help, especially when it comes to agriculture workers, help certify housing for workers that are living and working on farms and other agricultural institutions, and then also working to and we've seen this more so in the past where we've had asylum seekers or others who really need strong workforce services to get engaged into the labor force, whether that's through translation or helping them obtain a driver's license, again, or connecting them with employers directly. So we have played many different roles from the department here in terms of the immigration as it relates to workforce.
Let's carry that thread and think about your legacy and think about maybe the next person coming into your seat. What are one or two federal policies? And it could be the Workforce Innovation and Quality Act, it could be H-2A visas or UL discretionary grants. If you had to give some advice to the next commissioner and you said, look, we at the very least, you got to work to protect and be vigilant or expand some of these programs. What might be one or two, and let's break it down. What are one or two federally that, we're working with the federal government that can be chaotic? What might be one or two at the state level, which you probably have a lot more control over?
Yeah, so at the federal level, you mentioned the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and that's up for reauthorization. It has been discussed for multiple years now. That doesn't necessarily mean that if it's not reauthorized, it doesn't get funded. Most of our funding comes through that act, but I think there's a lot of opportunity there that gets left at the table because it's, again, federal government is slow, it's cumbersome. Even state government, we overcomplicate things at times, right? So there's a lot more opportunity with those funds than I think states have the option to take advantage of. So I think more flexibility in how those funds get used. And for me, I spent the last 4 years now as a leader with our national association, the National Association of State Workforce Agencies. And I've been both on the board and the executive committee of the board for that national association, and just am finishing my term as past chair of that. And that's where I think, it has really helped Vermont to have a voice and a seat at the table because we are a small state. Right. So when we look at movers and shakers in states that can really influence federal policy, it's your New Yorks, your Californias, your Texas, Florida, large states. So it's allowed Vermont to be at the forefront of that conversation. I think we need to be investing both as a state and a nation in more work-based learning opportunities. Apprenticeships are one aspect of that. But when we talk about the skills people need and where the gap is in the workforce, we are very clear as a country on our value of post-secondary education and getting a college degree. But what we have put to the side over many decades are things like working in the trades and becoming trade qualified and certified in, whether it's plumbing and electrician. But right now there's, hundreds of different trades out there, things in aerospace, advanced manufacturing, aviation, and healthcare that again do not necessarily require a college degree. And I think if we prioritize that work and those opportunities, that'll make a big difference, both for Vermont, but also nationally as well.
Yeah. I want to talk a little philosophical with you. Recently, the federal administration came out against Medicaid, I believe, and they're going to transform it and really make sure people. I think part of the catch there is people have to work in order to get Medicaid, assuming that they're not currently working. And I heard a report on it today that they dug into it and come to find out there's few people that aren't working who are on Medicaid. In fact, that's kind of the rule, is that you have to be working at least some odd hours. And so you've pushed back over your years, Mike. I think you've been at the department completely at 8 years, because you were deputy commissioner for many years. And then only during COVID did you become the full commissioner. But so you've been there for a while, and you've really worked, I think, to push back on this myth of laziness and focus more instead on the systematic barriers like childcare, like transportation, like housing. You mentioned that a little bit earlier today. And I just would love, as you kind of sunset this part of your career, what is your ongoing philosophy? What have you seen in the last 8 years where I think from some people, there's this concept of like, if you're homeless, you're lazy. If you're on Medicaid, you're lazy. Do you run into that often? Or are you finding, like you said, it's more that we have to break down some of these barriers to provide access to growing a person's career? As you mentioned, not all people are meant to go to college. So if we can provide a pathway to do skilled labor or military, have at it. So give me kind of your 8-year philosophical pitch on that.
Well, I think it's both. I think my emphasis, though, has been on the fact that we get wrapped up so much, and your comments kind of alluded to this, in the few, right? So we take what is happening with a few participants in a program, and then we paint with a broad brush. Right. If you look back at the Department of Labor and how it managed unemployment claims during COVID, all people would think about was, man, a majority of the people who filed for unemployment couldn't get through. They didn't get their benefits. Everything was delayed. But if you actually look at it percentage wise, right, 95% of the people made it through the program with no problem, right, or very little problem. And so what that tells me is, and I think we see this both in state government, we see it at the legislature, we see it in local town governments when we talk about select boards and city councils, right? That the few, the vocal, are essentially driving the policy. And it's not necessarily good policy because it's not taking in the greater good or the greater impact or the most common experience that folks have. So yes, I do think it's important, if someone's is able and available to work, and they're going to be seeking benefits, right, then they should have a requirement that means they need to work. Now, that requirement to look for work or to work, depending on what program you're talking about, needs to be flexible to meet people where they're at, right? So, here at the department, if you file for unemployment benefits, there is a requirement for most that you have to look for work while you're filing for benefits. We're thinking about creative ways that it doesn't always necessarily mean that you have to go sit for a job interview. What if looking for work also means you sit with a job specialist, a counselor, right? And they help coach you on interview skills, right? Or writing your resume, or helping you get into a training program, right? Would that also qualify as work search? Right. So I think we got to be thinking about, again, not a black and white situation, but probably many different shades there. When I look back over my tenure, right, like I have also believed that at the end of the day, the commissioner could disappear. And the folks that are still applying for benefits are going to get their benefits. The folks that are still needing workforce supports are going to get workforce supports. Our team is going to be out in work sites ensuring they're safe. Like nothing disappears if I were to disappear. So my job really is to ensure that my team here at the department can do their best work. Right? What tools and resources do they need to do their best work? And I think we see that with needing to modernize our systems. We see that with needing to upskill our own staff. We see that with needing to maybe have more people here doing the work with the team. But at the end of the day, like the best way I can serve Vermonters is by serving the people who serve Vermonters. And that has been my philosophy from the beginning. And I think we need to, unfortunately, and this happens more so, I think, at the federal government, but same at state level, is that we want to make meaningful change. But there are so many special interest groups or people that we're trying to cater to that when we're creating and passing policy, what we get in the end is vanilla. Like it doesn't really serve anybody, or it just serves so many people in such a little way that it's not impactful. And I think we really need some bold thinking. That doesn't mean, again, when I think about what's happening right now at the federal level with the administration, right? I think a lot of people, if you were to ask them, do we need something different from a federal government or different from a president, right? Before this last election, everybody would have said yes, right? They're kind of sick and tired of the politicians. They're sick and tired of the special interests. They think what's happening is not in their best interest. So I think everybody agreed that there needs to be meaningful change. The problem is that it's how we go about doing that. Right. And right now we've got somebody in office that doesn't really care about the humanistic side of things or the impact it has on people. And so his methodology or approach is very anti to I think what ours is in Vermont. But I think we all agree that we need meaningful change, both at the federal and the state level, if we're going to position Vermont for the future.
Yeah. And something I'll add to that, Mike, is, and we've talked about it for years and years, is special interests don't stop at the Vermont border. Yeah. You look at even at the House or the Senate, and there are, like you said, you find that there's a minority group and they become the loudest, and therefore full policy, full law gets changed or implemented out of that. And it's not to say that that's not warranted to hear those concerns, but I think in Vermont, you and I have talked for many years that there kind of seems to be a tilt in one direction, mainly partially because it's a special interest, right? And so if your normal interest is just getting up 9 to 5, going to work, trying to put in the best day you can, that isn't special ice cream. That is vanilla, and so that's not paid attention to as much. So.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that at the state level, the federal level, even the local level, and it really concerns me when we make significant changes to both state and federal and local laws based on the few, right? And there have been so many times, whether again over the different roles that I've had over my lifetime, where you see one policymaker who has a belief, but that belief isn't grounded in fact or data or information. It's their own personal belief that's driving their desire to change the law. Or they hear from a constituent or maybe 5 or 10 constituents. But when you really think about that, right, and you think about, well, this person actually represents 5,000 people, right? The fact that they're hearing from 5 people or 10 people does not mean that the experience of those 5 people is the same for the 5,000. And so I do get really nervous when we and concerned when we start making laws for the few and not or for the broader population.
All right, as we wrap up, I got a twofer for you, okay? So as you step away from the department, and I believe that's in July.
Yeah, it's the end of June. It's, I think, technically the first week in July.
Yeah, well, again, thank you for your service and all that you've done over the 8 years, both deputy and commissioner. What message do you have kind of going out to? So here's your twofer. What message to Vermont employers, to workforce development and job seekers? And then I think to add on to that, what unfinished business would you like to see continued in your role for this next person stepping in? So what's kind of a broad message for both employers and employees from your last lecture, and then what advice, what note in the drawer would you leave for the next commissioner?
I think the two things I would say for employers and job seekers is be bold, right? So there is a way to be successful both personally and professionally, and that is usually through bold and innovative thinking. So don't be afraid to take risks and be bold. I think the other thing that we need, just as a society, is more leading by example. And less finger pointing, right? And so we need people who are willing to walk the walk and walk the talk, right? So and lead by example. I think those are the big things. At a very basic level, the one thing I would love to see happen after I'm gone is the modernization of our unemployment insurance system. It's a $30 million project. It's slated to go live in the spring/summer of 2026. But I think more philosophically or holistically, I've tried really hard over the past 8 years, now in my 9th year, to build a culture here at the department that's built on things like professionalism and integrity, operational excellence, compassionate customer service, equity, access, and belonging. Things that are really important so that our team knows that as they're achieving the mission of the department, they're doing it in a way that has the best interest, both of them as the staff, but as the people they're serving. And I hope that that culture continues after I'm gone.
Great. Well, Commissioner Harrington, thank you again for joining us and for your steady leadership through one of the most, what we might call, the complex chapters in Vermont's workforce history.
Absolutely. So thanks, Matt. I really appreciate it. And it's great to be on.
Great. We often talk about workforce development as a policy issue, but let's be honest, it's deeply personal. It's about the mother returning to work after raising kids, the refugee navigating a new job and a new language, the small business trying to stay afloat, the retiree who's entering the workforce, not out of ambition, sometimes just out of necessity, and the young person deciding if Vermont can be a place to build a life and a career. Our systems, whether federal or state, must be designed not for headlines, but for those people. And that's what this conversation has reminded us, that labor policy is people policy, and it's good policy. That what happens in Washington doesn't just stay in Washington. It lands in our job centers, in our downtowns, and in the kitchen table budgets of working Vermonters. As Commissioner Harrington prepares to hand off the baton, the work ahead is clear. We need leadership that is data-driven and human-centered, that understands both spreadsheets and stories, that can hold the tension between growth and equity, compliance and compassion, federal constraints and Vermont creativity. To our viewers, thank you for being a part of our ongoing dialogue here. Thank you for continuing to ask the hard questions, show up, care about the future of work in this brave little state. Thank you once again to our producers, Cat TV and Mike Cutler over there in the studio. We appreciate you guys as you pull this all together for us. Until next time, I'm Matt Harrington, and this is the Chamber Telecast.